The grain hopper door gave way at the bottom of the world, and the noise came in like water. Neem fell with the last of the barley dust onto gravel that was still warm from the brakes, and before his eyes found anything at all, his ears had already taken the whole place apart. Big iron, breathing, rails ticking heat away in long descending scales, hundreds of them, each one pitched a little different by its length. A crane somewhere above him swinging weight on a cable that sang two notes at once, the high one true, the low one sour with rust. Couplings slamming close far down the line, 1, 2, a pause, 3, and under everything, beneath the shouting and the claxons in the river thudding against pilings he could not yet see, the canyon itself answered every sound twice. The whole terminal sat inside a throat of stone, and the stone was singing back. He lay in the gravel with grain dust in his throat reeds and felt the tympanic patches at his temples flex wide, drinking it. 11 days in dark cars eating boatloaf and listening to nothing but wheel thrum, and now this. He had never in his small life heard a place with so many voices. A wagon was coming, 6 wheels, electric, 2 adults aboard, one of them tapping a stylus against a slate in a bored-dead rhythm, clip, clip, clip. Wardens kept time like that in his experience, like people who had never once been asked to listen to themselves. Neem rolled under the hopper car and went still between the rails. The wagon slowed. A lamp swept the undercarriage, dragging shadows of axles across him in slow bars. He breathed through his side slits the way the barge minders had taught all the small ones, silent, shallow, and he passed the time the way he always passed it. He read the place. The wagon's left rear bearing was dry and would seize within a 10-day. The warden tapping the slate had a loose tooth. It clicked when he spoke. Far above, on a gantry near the canyon rim, a machine was sweeping the yard with sound too high for most ears, painting the morning in slow brushstrokes of tone, up, hold, down, not authority equipment. Authority equipment was never that patient. The lamp moved on, the wagon whined away toward the river stairs. Neem let his breath out, crawled to the third rail post from the hopper's coupling. Third post, always the third, because 3 was the start of the call, and pulled the worn steel washer from the cord around his neck. He looked both ways down a corridor of standing cars half a mile long, then he struck the post. 3 slow, 2 quick, kin here, door open. The post carried it beautifully. The canyon took the 5 beats and handed them back, softened, a half-breath late, like someone repeating your words to show they had been heard. Neem held still, patches spread, hoping the way he had hoped at 41 junctions before this one. Nothing answered. Nothing ever had yet. He chalked a small mark low on the post where dock folk would see it and wardens would not, shouldered his bundle, and went looking for water, food, and a place to be small in. He did not know that half a mile up on the gantry near the rim, the patient machine had stopped sweeping. He did not know that a human woman was standing very still over a screen, frowning at 5 beats of sound that had no business being in her survey. Margot Hale had been paid for 22 years to kill noise, and she was good enough at it to hate her work quietly and completely. The screen in front of her showed the Corvain drum the way she had been hired to see it, as a problem. A continental break-of-gauge terminal jammed into a decommissioned ore crusher canyon, 3 rail gauges and a river port meeting in a bowl of stone that resonated like the inside of a cello. 80 years of freight crews had learned to work in the ring of it. The Transit Combine's new automation suite could not. LiDAR hated the dust, the sensors hated the multipath echo, and the consultants hated everything. So they had sent for Margot Hale, the woman whose name was on the acoustic deadening of 19 habitat domes and one very famous concert hall she tried not to think about. Her contract said, survey the canyon, certify the kill plan, foam fill the old crusher gallery, dampen the throat, make the drum stop being a drum. She had been 3 hours into the baseline sweep when the anomaly walked into her data on 5 small feet, 3 slow, 2 quick. Down in band where a struck rail post lived. She pulled the timestamp, isolated it, played it back through the good headphones, and felt the back of her neck prickle, because it was clean. Machine faults stuttered. Loose fittings rattled with the wind. This was struck, deliberately, by something light, with a precision of spacing that her own metronome would have certified. And the canyon's reply was tucked in behind it at exactly the gallery's known decay rate, which meant whoever struck it had chosen, out of 10,000 posts, one whose pitch sat dead in the stone's favorite octave. Somebody down there was playing her survey site like an instrument. Again, she said to nobody, and scrubbed back and listened again. Then she did the thing that changed the shape of her year. She opened her archive, 22 years of site recordings, every dome and depot and tunnel bore she had ever silenced, and ran a pattern match, because the spacing nagged at her like a word she had heard once in another language. The match came back 9 times, 9 sites, junction sheds and silo ramps and 1 ferry slip, spread across 1,400 miles of the Meridian Freight Line, the most recent 8 months old, the oldest just over 2 years. In every recording, buried in the noise floor where no client had ever asked her to look, the same 5 beats. 3 slow, 2 quick. Struck on posts, on tank walls, on bridge shoes, always once, always answered by whatever echo the place could offer, and never repeated. Margot sat down slowly on her equipment case, 22 years of listening for things to erase, and something had been walking down the line ahead of her the whole time, knocking on the world, and the world had filed it under noise. She was not aware of deciding anything. She was aware of locking the gantry rig, going down 9 flights of Crusher-era stairs with her field recorder banging her hip, and standing in the corridor of cars by Hopper CV2208. She logged the number out of habit and immediately corrected herself. Logging was for clients, by a grain hopper, looking at a steel post with a small chalk mark low on its flank. The mark was a half circle with a line under it, a door open over a threshold, boots on gravel behind her, 2 pairs unhurried, and the cadence of a stylus on a slate. Clip. Survey access ends at the yellow line, ma'am. The warden was broad and sun-creased, his partner younger and already bored. Sweep day. We've had stowaway sign all along the river stairs since the morning grain cut. You'll want to be back upstairs. Stowaway sign, Margot said. Chalk and pilfered ration stock. Some yard rat off the cars. He said it the way men say weather. Combining wants the yard clean before the refit teams come through. They go to the Minder pools at Pellin Cross. It's no holiday, but it's walls. Margot had read about the Minder pools at Pellin Cross in the way everyone had. A paragraph, a shrug, a turned page. 200 unclaimed children of 19 species, warehoused politely. A door that closed. Past the warden's shoulder, 40 feet down the corridor, a shadow moved inside the shadow under a tank car, small. Still as a held breath now, the warden began to turn, following her eyes. Afterwards, she would tell herself she had only wanted to keep her anomaly out of a warehouse until she understood it, that it had been data protection, nothing softer. What she did was step on the dead rail with her full weight and let her boot heel ring it and say, too loudly, "Then you can help me. I'm logging structural resonance for the combine, and I need ambient silence on this corridor for 90 seconds. Both of you, boots still, radios down, starting now." There is a tone of voice that consultants are issued along with their contracts, and she had never once been grateful for it before. The warden stood like schoolboys for 90 seconds while she pointed her recorder at nothing, and under the tank car, unwatched, the small shadow poured itself across the gap between bogies and was gone toward the river. "Thank you," Margot said. "You've been very useful." They left her there. She stood a long moment in the corridor of cars, in the huge ringing patience of the drum, feeling like a woman who had just slid a coin into a machine without knowing what it sold. Then she walked to the 3rd post from the hopper's coupling, took the steel stylus off her belt, and struck it. 3 slow, 2 quick. The canyon handed the beats back, softened, a half-breath late. Then, from somewhere down by the river stairs, faint and clean through 400 feet of standing iron, 3 slow, 2 quick, and 1 more, low and uncertain, like a question mark. Margot Hale stood in the gravel, with her heart going like a hammer mill, and understood that she had just been asked something in a language she did not speak, and that she had better learn it fast. She answered the only way she could. She struck the post twice, soft, the gentlest sound she knew how to make on steel, and then she crouched down on her heels next to her recorder and waited the way you wait for a wild thing, with her hands still and the morning crane song swinging overhead. He did not come out that day. But the next morning, when she hauled her cases down to start the low yard sweep, somebody had chalked a small half circle with a line under it on the lid of her equipment trunk, and inside the latch, folded with the absurd care of a state document, was a strip of waxed ration wrapper smoothed flat, with 5 small dents pressed into it by a fingertip. 3 slow, 2 quick. She filed her first false report to the combine that afternoon. Survey on schedule, nothing unusual to log. It took 6 days, and she did it with sound, because food alone got her nowhere. She tried food first, of course, left a sealed tin of fish stew in a water flask by the 3rd post, and got the flask back the next dawn, empty, washed and refilled with river water, which shamed her in a way she spent an evening failing to name. He paid for things, this anomaly of hers. He kept accounts. So she stopped leaving payment and started leaving questions instead. She left her little spring-driven metronome on the trunk lid, ticking at 60, and from a dark stack of pallets 30 feet off, after 10 minutes of silence, a tapped answer doubled it at 120, dead on, then halved it, then syncopated around it with something that could only be called contempt, until she laughed out loud into the dark and the tapping stopped, and then, after a wary pause, started again, closer. She left a length of copper pipe and got back a scale. She left 2 lengths and got back an interval. On the 5th evening, she sat on her trunk in the open. No tricks, and played, off her field recorder through the little work speaker, the 9 archive captures, one after another, 1,400 miles of his own knocks coming back to him out of a box. The stack of pallets was quiet for a long time, longer than ever before. Then he walked out where she could see him, small, smaller than the shadow had suggested. Sandgold skin gone gray with rail dust, a row of breathing slits along each side of his throat, and at his temples 2 oval patches of skin stretched fine as drumhead which widened and narrowed slowly as he watched her. She would learn that this was how you told what a Drithi child could not say aloud. Huge dark amber eyes set in a thin face, ears that came up to soft points, one of them notched by some old story he never told her. He wore a man's work vest cut down with a knife and cinched with cargo cord, and around his neck on the same cord, a worn steel washer polished bright at the rim by years of striking. He stopped 8 feet away, which she understood was a treaty distance, and pointed one small gray-gold finger at the recorder. Mine, he said, in trade pigeon worn smooth as riverstone.
The knocks! Mine yours!
Margot agreed. All 9, I didn't know I had them. I silence places for work and I record them before I do it. You'd been through first 9 times. She turned her palm up slowly and set the recorder down on the gravel between them, inside his treaty distance, and stepped back. I've never once heard anything in my noise floors worth keeping, until you. The patches at his temples spread wide, taking her apart the way he had taken apart the yard, and she stood still and let herself be read. Heartbeat, breath, the loose buckle on her left boot, whatever else he graded people by. Whatever he found must have cleared some bar. He crossed the gravel, picked up the recorder, turned it over with the fast, sure hands of a child raised on machinery, and held it back out to her. Play again, he said. The water one. The fairy slip at Calder Reach, 8 months silenced, his 5 knocks ringing off a tin roof above black water. She played it. He closed his eyes, and his face did something that Margot Hale, who had stood dry-eyed through the deadening of a concert hall she had loved, had to look away from. Neem, he said when it ended, with his eyes still shut. He touched his own chest. Neem, Margot, said Margot. He opened his eyes, looked at her boot, looked at her face, and delivered the longest sentence she had heard from him, assembled with visible labor from his stock of pigeon. Your machines make places quiet. A pause. The patches narrowed to wary slits. This place too? And Margot Hale, consultant of record on the Corvain drum decommission, certifier designate of the foam fill of the last great resonant gallery on the Meridian line, looked into the dark amber eyes of the only audience her noise floors had ever had and said, "Not if I can help it." She had no idea, saying it, that she meant it. That was the trouble with the boy from the very start. He kept making her mean things. The drum's evening settle began around them while they stood there. The day's heat letting go of 10,000 rails, one tick at a time, a vast unhurried orchestra of cooling iron that rolled around the canyon's throat like the stone was counting its children before sleep. Neem's head came up. His patches went wide as coins. It does this every night, Margot said. Crews set their watches by it. It talks, the boy said, with the simple scorn of someone correcting an obvious error, and then he did the thing she would be chasing for the rest of her life with every microphone she owned. He pulled the washer off his neck cord, walked to the nearest rail, crouched, waited inside the rolling tick of the settle with his head cocked like a watchmaker, and struck 3 slow, 2 quick, placed so exactly into the gaps of the cooling iron that the canyon's answer came back braided into the settle itself. The 5 beats of his call, picked up and handed from rail to rail down the corridor, overlapping, multiplying, until for 4 or 5 impossible seconds the whole evening yard seemed to be saying it with him, in 100 small voices of iron. Kin here, door open, door open. Then it faded into ordinary ticking, and he was just a small gray-gold boy crouched by a rail with a washer in his hand, looking up at her to see if she had heard it. I heard it, Margot said. Her voice came out wrong. I heard you. That was the first night. She bought him dinner from the night shift canteen, stew and flat dumplings. He ate like arithmetic, half now, quarter wrapped for later, quarter pushed back across to her because accounts were accounts. And he slept, finally, in the watch alcove of her gantry platform with his back to the warm transformer housing, and Margot sat up late with her false survey report open and unsent, listening to the river slap the pilings, doing sums of her own. The sweep wardens worked the yard in pairs. The refit teams came in 9 weeks. The foam fill certification sat in her queue with her name pre-filled on the signature line. And 400 miles down the river, though she would not learn it for some days yet, a soft-spoken Calabar scrap boss named Vetch was reading a report of his own, from a spotter who watched the Corvain yards for him, about a stray Drithi boy who could hear a live current through a sealed bulkhead and was already, in his tidy ledger-keeping way, working out what such a pair of ears would fetch and what they would save him in Cutter's fingers. The drum ticked itself cool. The boy slept. The woman didn't. By the end of that first week, the yard had begun, in the way of yards, to know things without being told. Margot registered him with the gate office as her calibration assistant, a job title she invented at the counter, with a fee schedule invented 30 seconds later, paid out of her own per diem to make it real in the ledgers, because a thing in the ledgers was a thing wardens walked past. The gate clerk, an immense and incurious Holland who had seen every species of paperwork crime, looked at the small boy standing very straight beside her with his washer on its cord, looked at Margot and stamped the day pass without a word. The stamp was good for the survey's duration, 9 weeks. She did not let herself look at that number while the clerk pressed it into the page. Neem took to the work as if the work had been waiting for him. It had, in a sense. Her trade ran on reference tones and calibrated patience. Strike a known pitch, measure what the space does to it, map the room's voice one frequency at a time. She had instruments worth more than a switching engine to do the striking. Within 3 days she was using the boy instead, because the instruments told her what a sound measured, and Neem told her what it meant. He walked the crusher gallery with his patches spread and one hand trailing the stone and called out the dead spots and the live ones faster than her. A ray could sweep them. He found a crack in the gallery's east vault by ear, from 60 feet below it. Because the echo limped there, her own laser survey confirmed it the next day, and she sat looking at the overlay for a long time, the boy's chalk mark and her instrument's red flag on the same square meter of ancient stone. "You could make a living at this," she told him. "I make a living at this," he said, with a small dry dignity that was entirely new information about him, and held out his hand for the canteen tokens he was owed. She paid him, she always paid him. It took her longer than it should have to understand that the accounts were not greed but architecture, that a boy alone on a freight line for 2 years stays alive by being worth something and owing nothing, and that every debt he refused to carry was a door he could still walk out of. The day she understood it, she stopped trying to give him things and started trading instead, and the trading went easier than the giving ever had. What he traded her mostly was the drum. She had surveyed 40 major structures and had never once been shown one. He showed her. He showed her the spot under the number 2 crane where 4 echoes arrived together and a drop bolt sounded like a bell choir. He showed her how the river pilings thudded a fat, slow pulse all day, that every other sound in the canyon quietly organized itself around, the way a crew organizes around a foreman without anyone saying so. He showed her the long gallery at dawn before the first cut of cars came down, when the stone was so quiet you could hear it remembering, his pigeon, hear it remembering, and she wrote it in her field notes and then sat chewing her stylus, a 46-year-old engineer ambushed by a phrase. And on the 8th evening, up on the gantry with her spare contact mics and a salvaged sheet of roof tin and 3 lengths of copper pipe and the spring metronome, he built the first machine. She watched him do it and missed what it was until it was already speaking. He hung the pipes off the gantry rail at heights he chose by tapping and listening, fussy as a jeweler. He wedged the tin where the transformer housing's hum would lean against it. He set her metronome ticking at the pulse of the river pilings. He found their tempo by closing his eyes for 11 seconds, and then he wound. Twine from its pendulum arm to a cargo washer hung against the middle pipe so the river's tempo, translated through the cheap spring heart of her metronome, struck his 5-beat call against copper once a minute, soft, patient, automatic. The transformer hummed the tin into a low drone underneath. The canyon answered the way the canyon answered everything. It was a beacon. He had built, out of her spare parts and the junk of the yard, a small tireless machine that sat above the Corvain drum and said, "Once a minute, instruct copper and humming tin. Kin here, door open. For when I sleep," Neem said, matter of fact, testing the twine. A door should not close just because the keeper sleeps. Margot looked at the thing, ugly as a bird's nest, ringing its 5 soft notes out over half a mile of iron, and asked the question she had been circling for 8 days. "Neem, who's meant to hear it?" The patches at his temples went very still, which she had learned meant a door of a different kind. He was quiet so long the metronome got in 2 more rounds of the call. "Clan Amet," he said at last. "My people, rig folk, dock folk, we had a barge." He laid the words down one at a time, like a man laying out tools he hadn't unwrapped in years. "Creche barge, Amet's promise. 41 of us small ones, the minders, the old pilots. Big slow boat, full of drums," a breath through the side slits. "At Tarwick Port, 2 years back, men came on with papers the clan owed. The boat was the owing." His small hand closed around the washer. "Clan went to work crews, all different rivers. Debt crews don't choose where they go. Small ones went to minder pools." His eyes came up to hers, dark amber level. "I went out a window, and the knocks," Margot said. 41 junctions, 42, Neem said. "Rig folk move, always move. You cannot find moving people by standing still, and I cannot make the line stand still." He touched the middle pipe, stopping its ring with one finger, precise as punctuation. So I leave the call everywhere, on the posts, on the bridges, kin here, door open. If clan passes after me, they hear it. They know a door of Amit is alive and walking the line. They leave the answer mark. Door found. He showed her, chalked on the gantry rail, the half circle with the line, and beside it the same sign turned over. 42 junctions, he said again. And then with no change of register at all, which was the worst part, no answer marks yet. The metronome ticked. The copper said it again. Kin here, door open. The drum is loud, Neem said, looking out over the yard. Loudest place on the whole line. Everything comes through here someday. Everything. His patches spread slowly to their widest, drinking the evening settle as it began to roll. So this is the best door I ever had. I am going to knock it so loud, Margot. For the first time since she'd met him, his voice cracked out of its careful flatness, up into a child's register, fierce and bright. I am going to knock this place so loud the whole river hears whose door is open. Margot Hale looked at her phone fill certification. Sitting in her queue with her name pre-filled, the document that would pour 10,000 tons of acoustic deadening into the best door he ever had, and said nothing, and hated herself with a thoroughness she had not achieved since the concert hall. The man came up to her platform on the 11th day, and he came politely, which she held against him ever after. He sent a runner first with a card, actual cardstock, embossed, Vetch, Reclamation and Salvage, Meridian Line, with a Riverport box number and no first name. The Kalavar who followed it up the 9 flights wore a clean canvas coat over a frame like a load-bearing column, and he arrived unwinded, and he stood at the platform rail looking out over the yard for a moment, the way a man looks at a field. He is pricing. Engineer Hale. His voice was soft and exact, trade standard with river vowels. You'll forgive the intrusion. I hold the salvage concession on the dead sidings Tarwick to the cross. When the combine forecloses on the gallery, the strip rights come through my office, so you and I will be doing business by autumn. I make a point of meeting the people I'll be doing business with. He smiled, and the smile was fine. Margot had no complaint to make of the smile. And I confess a second errand. I'm told you've taken on an assistant. A small drithy, very good ears. There's a labor broker at Pellin Cross who's been asking after a boy of that description. Placement papers, family matters, you understand. I told him I'd inquire since I was coming up. Everything in the sentence was a door swinging on oiled hinges. Family matters, placement papers, asking after. My assistant's paperwork is on file at the gate office, Margot said. Day passed, fee scheduled, and logged under my contract. The Combine's lawyers are welcome to audit it. So is your broker. Of course. Vetch turned the card she had not taken neatly in his fingers. You misunderstand me, engineer, happily. There's no claim being pressed, only an open inquiry. Children drift, on the line. Sometimes they drift somewhere better. I always think it's worth knowing which it is. He looked past her then, deliberately, to the gantry rail where the bird's nest beacon hung ringing its 5 soft notes over the yard, and he listened to one full round of it with his head tipped, and something moved behind his face that was worse than the smile. Recognition. Appraisal. Arithmetic. Clever, he said. They're a musical people, the rig folk. I've had a number of them through my crews over the years. It's a pleasure, always, hearing what they can do. He set the card down on her equipment trunk, squaring it to the corner with one fingertip. If the boy should drift again, my office is the box on the card. The line can be a hard place for good ears. Things get loud. Things get dangerous. The smile again, fine as ever. I'd hate to read that something had happened to him. She watched him all the way down the 9 flights. He never once touched the handrail. That evening she did 2 things. She told Neem, plainly, treaty distance honest, everything Vetch had said, and watched the boy go through the sentences the way he went through. Machinery, fast, sure-handed, finding what they meant. Pinchman, he said flatly when she finished. Cutting crews. He papers kids out of the pools and runs them in the ducts where grown cutters don't fit. Tick told me at the cross. He saw her look and clarified, with terrible simplicity. Kids on the line all know Vetch. The good ears go to the vault work. Live lines, lock tumblers. The ones who stop hearing so well after, those go back in the ducts. The second thing she did was open her foam fill certification, scroll to the signature line, and instead of signing it, begin, in a private file, on her own storage, off the Combine system, a different document, which she had no authority to write and no reason to believe anyone would read. She gave it a dry title, because dry titles got read. Alternative Compliance Pathway, Resonant Positioning in High Multipath Freight Environments. What it said under the dryness was a heresy of the first order. It said, you are about to spend 40 million credits killing the echo because your sensors can't see through it. The echo is not your obstacle. It is your instrument. The canyon already touches every car, every rail, every crane in this yard with sound, all day, for free. Stop trying to make the drum blind friendly. Teach the system to listen. She worked on it until the river ran pale with dawn, and the beacon rang its 5 notes once a minute over her head the whole night through, patient as a lighthouse, and she did not notice when she started timing her sentences to it. The grain dome at Chelsea Ramp was the first time the line heard him. It was a subcontract she'd accepted months before, a 3-day job, deadening the interior of a 200-foot storage dome whose echo drove the automated graders mad. Standard kill. She nearly went alone, and then with sweep wagons working the low yard and Vetch's card sitting on her trunk, like a coin in a machine, she did not go alone. She amended the gate paperwork, listed her calibration assistant for travel, and took the boy. Neem rode the cab of the works engine the whole way down with hack patches wide, drinking the line, and at every junction the engine slowed through. Everyone, his head turned, hunting the posts for answer marks that were not there, and Margot watched him do it 40 miles and learned what 2 years of that did to the set of a small gray-gold face. The dome was due for deadening on the 3rd morning. On the 2nd evening, with her baseline sweeps finished and filed, the grader crews off shift, the great empty barley-smelling vault of the place ringing faintly to their footsteps. Neem stood in the middle of the floor, looked straight up the dome's axis for a long moment, and said, "Before you kill it, it should get to say everything it knows." "That's not," Margot began, consultant to the last, and then stopped, because actually there was nothing in the contract about the night before. What he did with the dome took him 4 hours to rig and lasted 11 minutes, and she recorded all of it, and in the years after, that recording would be duplicated and passed from hand to hand down the meridian line in ways she never traced and never once tried to stop. He hung her contact mics where the dome's voice pooled. He set the spring metronome on the river pulse he carried in his body now like a second heart. He laid out in a circle around himself on the dome floor the day's gleanings: copper pipe, a cracked grater vane, 60 meters of chain, the tin, 2 empty barley scoops, the steel washer off his neck, and then the small boy stood in the middle of the largest resonating chamber on the southern line and played his call into it and built it, layer by patient layer, voice by voice. 3 slow, 2 quick, struck on copper, taken up by the dome, handed back, struck again under its own echo, so call and answer braided. The chain dragged in a slow circle for a tide sound underneath. The grater vane bowed against the floor for a long, sour singing note that the dome, polished sweet by the 4th pass. The scoops for the backbeat, bright and silly and exactly right. The washer, last, highest, placed into the towering stack of echoes like a keystone, until the whole dome was saying it at once, top to bottom, 100 feet of stack barley-smelling, air-ringing, kin here, door open, and the boy in the middle of it with his arms moving like a switchman, like a conductor, like a child, his face turned up, his patches spread so wide they were luminous at the edges, playing the only thing he ever played, which was, "Find me, I kept the door open, find me." The 11 minutes ended. The dome spent a further 40 seconds letting go of the last of it, and then there was a silence Margot had no measurement for. And from the man door at the dome's rim, somebody whistled, low and reverent, and somebody else said a word in a dialect she didn't know, and Margot turned and saw 11 members of the night grader crew, who had heard the ringing clear across the ramp yard and come over expecting machine fault, standing crowded in the doorway like people at the rail of a ship. The crew chief, a wide old human woman with grain dust in every seam of her, looked from the boy to the circle of junk to the boy again and said, "What in the name of all 4 rivers was that?" "That was the dome," Neem said, winding twine off the metronome, small and dry and spent. "It goes quiet tomorrow. It wanted to be heard once first." He said it the way he said everything, as a plain fact of acoustics, and Margot watched it land on 11 freight workers who had spent their lives inside machinery that nobody had ever once suggested might want anything. The crew chief stood there with her jaw working. Then she crossed the floor, heavy-booted, crouched down to the boy's level the way you'd crouch to read a gauge, and held out one wide hand, palm up. "Tessa Dubs," she said. "Graders Nights. Play the start of it again, son. Just the knock. I want to learn it." And Neem, who paid for everything and owed nothing, who kept his treaty distances like state borders. Margot saw him take one breath, side slits flaring, pricing this enormous purchase. Then he reached out and tapped it slow on the woman's callous palm, 3 and 2, teaching it, and 11 graders crowded in around the circle of junk to listen, and the door of him stood open so wide that Margot had to walk to the wall and check a perfectly functional microphone cable until her eyes could be trusted in company again. The dome was deadened on schedule the next morning. Margot signed the completion sheet with the recording from the night before already copied to 3 places, and the crew chief Dubs shook her hand at the gate and held it 1 beat too long and said, not quietly, "Whatever that yard of yours decides about the boy engineer, you tell them the Chelsea ramp heard him. We'll say so to anyone who asks." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud, the thing that was happening. Margot turned it over all the way home like the strange coin it was. The line was beginning to take sides. The fog made the argument for her 15 days later in the oldest language the line had, near disaster. It came down the canyon overnight, river fog of the dense early winter kind, and by dawn the Curvain drum was a bowl of milk. Crews worked it the way crews had worked it for 80 years, slow and loud and swearing. But that autumn, for the first time, the yard had guests who could not. The Combine's advanced refit team had erected 6 trial sensor masts along the hump and the river leads, the vanguard of the automation suite, LiDAR and optical arrays worth more than the gantry they stood on, and Margot stood on that gantry at first light, listening to the refit engineers on the open channel, discovering what every switchman below them had known since before their company existed. The canyon ate light for breakfast. 6 masts blind as bottles. The trial supervisor ordered manual operations suspended on the lower leads until visibility returned, which was the correct procedure, and which assumed that everything in the yard was capable of suspending. At 7 minutes past the hour, a 40-year-old hump retarder on the north lead failed closed to open with a cut of 9 loaded tank cars already over the crest. Margot heard the channel go to splinters. Runaway, runaway north lead. Nobody with a bearing on it. Heard the klaxons start their general ball, which told every soul in the fog precisely nothing except be afraid everywhere. And heard, under her own breastbone, the arithmetic everyone on that channel was doing at once. 9 loads, gathering road, somewhere in a white blindness with a dozen possible routings, and at the bottom of 3 of those routings, the river piers, where a barge crew was offloading directly under the crane they could not see from. 20 feet. Then she heard the thing she heard for the rest of her life whenever it rained on iron. She heard Neem's washer strike the gantry rail beside her, once hard, attention the drum deck's first word, and the boy was past her to the rail with his patches spread so wide they pulled the skin of his temples taut, head tilting in small precise increments, like a dish finding a signal, and he said in his flat load-bearing voice, lead 4, past the scale shed. No, 8 cars and 1 is light, the last one is empty, it slams. A breath, switch at the scale shed is set wrong. They are going to the piers. Margot Hale did not say, how do you know? That question had died in her somewhere around the east vault crack. She keyed straight onto the yard channel over the top of the klaxon and the splinters, consultant's voice, the tone they issue you with the contract, and said, all stations, acoustic survey has the runaway. Lead 4, passing the scale shed, 8 loads, 1 empty, routed for the piers. Pier crew, clear the apron now, tower. Who can throw the river ladder to the sand drag and how fast? 11 seconds of fog silence on the channel, into which an old switchman's voice said, reasonably, who in all 4 rivers is acoustic survey? And then Dubbs's voice, because the Chelsea rail car had come up that week to help site her winter arrays. Dubbs's voice like a grain scoop hitting a deck. She's the one that's right, Tammin, throw the ladder. What happened next happened the way it happens when a yard decides to believe. Fast, blind, and on one bearing. The tower threw the ladder switch they could not see for a cut they could not see, on the word of a boy they could not see, and the pier crew went up the apron stairs in a body, and Neem stood on the gantry calling the runaway's progress in that flat voice, scale shed. Now the ladder, taking the points, it's heavy, it rocks, tracking 9 invisible cars through a quarter mile of milk by flange squeal and slam and the particular sourness, he said later, of a wheel running faster than its bearing liked. And at 22 past the hour, the cut took the sand drag at the bottom of the river ladder and went in, and stopped, in a long rumbling exhalation of gravel and couplings, 60 yards short of water, 11 yards short of the crane, harming in total nothing. The fog held another 4 hours. Nobody worked. The story crossed the yard faster than the runaway had. The pier crew stood drinks at the canteen for a small drithy who did not drink and banked. The goodwill like the capital it was. The old switchman Tammin climbed 9 flights to look at the boy with his own eyes, shook Margot's hand sideways like a pump handle, and said words she later put, scrubbed of oaths, on the first page of her proposal. 40 years I've worked this hole, ma'am. Everybody knows you can hear the whole yard from the rim, and not one soul in 40 years ever thought to use it. Superintendent Corm came up at noon, while the refit engineers were still composing the incident report that would have to explain 6 blind masts and a save executed by ear. He stood on the gantry a long moment, fog purling on his 30-year coat, looking at the boy, who looked back, treaty distance, patches narrowed, pricing him, and at the woman and at the bird's nest beacon ticking its 5 soft notes over the rail, which he listened to twice through, the way Vetch had once listened, except that what moved behind this face was older and harder to read. Incident inquiry will say a survey contractor exceeded her brief with a fortunate outcome. He said at last, dry as ever, it will be right. He turned for the stairs and stopped and delivered the rest to the fog rather than to either of them, which Margot came to understand was how Aldous Corm filed the things that did not fit his slate. 30 years ago, there was a hump rider here, old riverman, deaf in one ear, who could stand at the scale shed and tell you the weight of a cut to the ton by the sound it made on the points. Retired the year the combine bought the line, nobody replaced him. Nobody could. A pause. I had forgotten the yard used to have ears, is what I am saying. Mind your brief, engineer. He went down. Neem watched him all the way to the bottom, head cocked. That one, the boy said, in the tone he used for load-bearing iron, listens. He has just been told for 30 years that it is not allowed. The proposal went into Margot's private file that same night, half built already from weeks of notes. The fog save went in as the cover anecdote, and one other entry went into a different ledger, 400 miles south, where a spotter's report of the morning's events was read twice by a soft-spoken Colavar, who took out a tidy pen and, against the line that priced a stray Drithy boy's ears, revised the figure upward by a factor that made his foreman whistle. The cold came down the river valley in the 6th week like a freight of its own, and it brought the year's first real bill. The drum in winter was a different instrument. Neem said so within an hour of the temperature falling, stopping dead in the middle of the low yard with his head cocked, announcing, "Everything went up a half step," in the scandalized tone of a man whose furniture has been rearranged in the night. The rails rang harder and carried farther. The river slowed and thickened, and its fat pulse under everything went long and grave. Crews worked muffled and short-spoken, and the boy, born on a heated creche barge and raised since in whatever warmth the line left unguarded, took the cold badly, and refused with his whole small architecture of dignity to say so. She caught it on the third bitter morning, the half-beat lag in his answers. The patches at his temples drawn tight and dull, the way he held his striking arm close to his ribs between tasks. By evening, the lag was a full beat. By night, he was a small furnace curled against the transformer housing, side slits working too fast, too shallow, and Margot Hale learned what fear of a particular new kind tasted like at 2 in the morning, on a gantry, in the wind, holding a flask of canteen broth he was too proud to be helped with, and too weak to hold steady. The yard infirmary asked for registry papers she didn't have. The duty medic, human, young, tired, looked at the boy shivering upright in his cut-down vest, trying to stand like an employee, and at Margot's gate office day pass with its invented job title, and did the brave and ordinary thing, wrote Drithy Juvenile, contractor's crew. Registry pending in the log, treated him for river lung, and said only, as they left 2 days later with a course of warming salts, "Whatever pending means, engineer, make it mean something before the next cold snap. The pools at Pellin Cross clear their winter intake in spring. Pending children get swept up in that. It's how the paperwork runs when nobody makes it run otherwise." Margot missed the Combine's interim certification deadline that week, the first deadline she had missed in 22 years of consulting. The reprimand arrived with copy all formality. Schedule variance noted. Contractor reminded of decommission timetable. Refit teams confirmed for week 9. She read it twice, filed it, and went back to sitting where she had been sitting on a crate by the infirmary cot, learning knock language. Because that was the other thing the fever did. It opened the boy's doors at the hinges. Too tired for treaty distances, half dreaming in the salt's warmth, Neem talked in pidgin, in fragments, in taps against the cot frame when the words ran out. And for 2 nights, Margot was let all the way into the drowned country of Clan Amet. The barge that was a world, 41 children. The drum deck where the old pilots kept the clan's whole history in rhythm cycles that took a winter, each to learn. The hearth call, 3 slow and 2 quick, oldest pattern of all, the one even babies knew, the one you struck on the hull when you came home through fog so the watch would light the ramp. The answer, too soft, just too soft, like footsteps coming to a door. He showed her against the cot frame, made her do it back until her spacing satisfied him, and fell asleep mid-correction, one finger still raised in pedantry, and Margot sat in the dark with her hand flat on the cot frame, keeping the 2 soft beats going long after he was under. The way you keep a lamp lit in a window, not because anyone can see it, but because putting it out is unthinkable. It was there, on the second night, that the welder found them. She came into the infirmary annex with the late shift's walking injuries, a drithy woman of maybe 50 in deck crew gray, burn scared along both forearms, moving with the contained economy of people who are owned in all but name. And she stopped inside the door as if she had walked into a wall, because Margot, not thinking, keeping her lamp lit, was tapping 2 soft beats on a cot frame over a sleeping drithy child. The woman crossed the annex in 5 steps. She looked at the boy's face for a long moment, and her temple patches, scarred, half-stiff, spread as wide as they still could, and she said something fast and low in Rigtong that needed no translation, because every species in the galaxy says some version of it in some doorway eventually. Gods, he has the look of them. Her name was Mara Welder. Third class, 14 years left on a debt she had not personally contracted. Working bridge repairs up and down the middle meridian for a crew company that held her papers. And she was of the river clans. Not Amit, she said, but cousin water, close enough to know the calls, close enough that as a girl she had twice tied up alongside Amit's promise at the winter gatherings and heard its drum deck going all night across the ice. She sat with them an hour, all she could steal, and what she gave them in that hour reshaped the map in Margot's head entirely. You think he's hunting a lost family, Mara said, watching the boy sleep. He is not. He is doing his work. Understand, on a creche barge every small one has a task. It is how the clan teaches. Some feed the nets. Some mind the smaller smalls. She nodded at Neem. A child like this one, with ears like the ones he's described to half the line by now? That child keeps the door watch. The hearth call is his to strike and his to answer. It is not a child's game, it is a post. Her scarred patches flexed. The clan was broken and scattered, and every one of them carried away to debt crews that move where the company says. Nobody could hold a door anywhere, except the one small keeper who went out a window, and he looked at 1,400 miles of freight line and decided the whole of it would have to be his hull, and he has been walking up and down striking the watch call on it for 2 years. She looked at Margot. He is not lost, engineer. He is on duty. He is the only one of them whose post survived. Do you see? As long as the call is struck somewhere, Clan Amit still has a door. The day he stops, it doesn't. Then help him hold it, Margot said. You're a river. You know the gatherings, the routes, the... I am papers in a company drawer, Mara said without self-pity, a welder stating a load tolerance. I cannot take him. I cannot even stay past this job. We lift for the cross-river spans on the morning barge. She was quiet a moment. But I can do what river folk do, which is carry word. Every deck crew has rig folk salted through it, and deck crews touch every port on this line. And we talk, engineer, we have always talked. It's the one thing they can't hold in a drawer. She stood, and at the door she paused and struck the frame once with one scarred knuckle, 2 soft beats. Tell him a cousin of the winter ice heard his watch and will say so down the water. Tell him the door is heard. It is not the same as found. Her voice did not change and her eyes did, but on a long watch it is everything. She was gone on the morning barge, Neem. When Margot gave him every word of it, sitting up in the cot, very still, his washer in his fist, did not do any of the things a human child might have done. He looked at the wall for a while. Then he said heard in Rigtong first and Pigeon after, as if checking the weight of it in both hands, and then he slept 11 hours without medication, and woke up demanding the gantry, the beacon, and an itemized account of everything his employer had failed to record while he was indisposed. But Margot had been left with her own word to carry, because Mara at the door had said one thing more, low, human to human almost. The man Vetch has been asking down the ports for a drithy boy with keeper's ears. He asks like a man pricing cable. I have seen what his crews do with rigfolk children. Engineer the ducks first, the vaults after, and the ones who stop hearing go back in the ducks. You have the look of someone who thinks paper and witnesses will hold him off. The scarred patches had gone flat. Paper holds Vetch off exactly as long as no one is looking the other way. Make sure of your yard, woman of the drum. Make very sure who is looking and when. Before the tunnel, though, there was the winter hole, because Neem came out of his fever with a debt on his books, and a keeper's debts got paid. He led her down past the river stairs on the first hard, bright morning of his recovery, along a catwalk she had surveyed twice without ever seeing what it sheltered. A dead steam main, man-high, dry and warm where it passed the pump-house wall, its inspection hatch hung with sacking. The drum's own small souls wintered there. She counted 6 that morning and learned never to trust the count, because yard kids of 4 species came and went down the line like weather. A pair of Murrin brothers with quick-clawed hands, a molting vest girl who spoke only machine pigeon, a human boy of no more than 10 with a switchman's cast-off gloves to his elbows, and others in season. They scraped by on canteen scraps, on errands run for crews who paid in kind, on the yard's enormous unofficial tolerance, and on a body of survival knowledge so precise it would have shamed a station master's rulebook. The medic knew of the whole, Margot discovered, and so did half the night shift, and nobody knew of it at all officially, because official knowledge ended at Pellin Cross. Neem went among them like an envoy of a small, strict state. What he had owed them, it turned out, was warning. He had been sick, and the whole sentry codes had gone unrepaired for 2 weeks. And that was, by his accounting, the doorkeeper's failure. So Margot spent a morning she would not have traded for any contract on her books, sitting on a warm, dead pipe, watching the drum boy teach knock language to the line's forgotten children. The danger code, the warden code, 2 species of caution, carefully distinct. The food call, the all clear, each one drilled with his watchmaker's pedantry, your weight through the iron again, until even the molting vest girl could wrap the warden warning down 60 feet of steam main and have it arrive still meaning something. "You're building a yard inside the yard," Margot said when the lesson broke up. "The yard already had small ones in it," Neem said, packing his chalk. "It just had no way for them to hear each other." He looked down the long, warm dark of the pipe, and his patches did the slow wide narrow of a thought he was deciding whether to say aloud. "Tick taught me half these codes at the cross. The pinch crews use them in the ducks. Vetch's foremen think it is rats in the walls." His voice stayed flat, which was how she knew the weight of what came next. "That is the thing I am owed to fix someday, Margot." He took their own language into the dark with them and made it serve him. A call should never serve the man who closed the door. There has to be an accounting for that. I have not worked out the shape of it yet. She started a standing account at the night canteen that afternoon, some small enough to draw no audit, drawn against her per diem, redeemable by knock code, a piece of bookkeeping she and the canteen's old Holland cook constructed with 2 nods and no sentences. And she filed the boy's flat, unfinished vow where she filed everything of his now in the part of her that had stopped being a consultant. There has to be an accounting. I have not worked out the shape of it yet. By spring, she would watch him work it out, 11 minutes at a time, with the whole meridian for a drum deck. But first the line sent the tunnel. Week 7 gave them the tunnel, and the tunnel gave them the first true reach of Vetch's arm, and it came dressed in the cruelest costume on the whole line. The bore at Haddon Saddle was the last subcontract on her book, a 4-mile rail tunnel whose ventilation drumming had to be mapped before the refit's new fans went in. Honest work, 2 days, and the drum's sweep wagons were thick in the low yard that week as the decommissioned timetable bit down. So again she took the boy. The bore crews knew him before he arrived. That was the new fact of the line that winter. The Celsi recording had traveled, engine cab to engine cab, canteen slate to canteen slate, and freight workers who had never met him had opinions about him, had favorites among his 11 minutes, called him the drum boy in chalk on at least 3 water towers that Margot had personally seen. At Haddon Saddle, the Boers' portal watch greeted Neem by striking 3 and 2 on the gate rail, grinning, proud of themselves. Neem stopped walking, and Margot watched him absorb in real time the size of what he had not noticed himself building, that he had set out to leave a door mark on a freight line, and the freight line had begun, clumsily, in its 1,000-handed way, to knock back. "They have the spacing wrong," he said at last, thickly, which from him was an aria. The grab came on the second evening, and it came as the hearth call. He was alone for 10 minutes, genuinely alone, Margot downbore with the vent crew, the portal watch changing shift, dusk settling into the cut, when from the scrub slope above the portal apron came the 5 beats. 3 slow, 2 quick. Struck true, struck right, struck on wood the way barge folk strike, and pitched small like a child's hand or a woman's. 2 years, 42 junctions. And every protocol the drum deck had ever taught him said the keeper answers and goes to the door. And he was 8 steps up the scrub slope at a dead run, washer in his fist, side slits wide before the wrongness pulled him up. Afterward, asked how he knew, he gave Margot the whole forensic file in one flat sentence. The spacing was true, but the weight was dead. Clan strikes through the wood. This struck at it. Also no barge folk alive would call from upslope of a stranger's portal. He'd stopped on the slope. He had stood there in the dusk, and into the silence where his answer should have gone, somebody upslope, too eager, breaking cover, had struck the call again, begging, baiting. And the boy who had been answering that call with his whole small life looked at the scrub line and did the hardest thing Margot ever knew him to do. He struck back 2 beats, but loud, flat, wrong-spaced, mocking, the rhythm equivalent of a guard's challenge, and then he turned and walked, not ran, down the slope to the portal lamps in the returning watch, with his ears burning and his face like a closed gate, while the scrub line above him rustled with the sound of 2 large bodies realizing the fish had read the hook. The portal watch found boot prints, a wad of tally paper, and a cheap wooden practice block, mail-ordered, of the kind used to teach percussion to human children. The Boer foreman wanted constables. What arrived instead the next noon was a polite runner with a card, Vetch, Reclamation and Salvage, and a message in soft exact trade standard that the foreman read aloud with his jaw tightening. "Word reaches me of trespass and mischief near my concession survey at Haddon Saddle. Salvage attracts rough men. I regret it. I have dismissed 2 cutters for exceeding their brief. Assure the Combine's acoustic contractor that I hold her work, and her household, in the highest regard. Her household." Margot stood in the Boer office with the card in her hand and understood that she had been sent an invoice. The grab had failed. "Very well," said the soft, exact voice under the words. "But observe what it cost me. 2 men, nothing. Observe what the attempt cost you. Now you know that anywhere on this line, forever, the one sound the boy cannot help turning toward can be counterfeited by anyone with a practice. Block in a mail catalog. I have taught your child not to trust his own front door. Consider, engineer, what I might teach him next. She filed her second false report that evening, survey on schedule. No incidents, because the truthful version went to the Combine's risk desk, and the risk desk's remedy for a contractor's irregular juvenile was a sweep wagon and the spring intake at Pell and Cross. Then she sat a long time watching Neem, who was out on the portal apron in the cold, teaching the night, watch the true spacing of the call with the fierce particular patience of a keeper repairing his door, and she made the decision she had been not making for 7 weeks. In the morning, she pulled the private file, Alternative Compliance Pathway. Resonant positioning in high multipath freight environments, gave it one last merciless read, attached 40 seconds of audio and submitted it, over her own name, through the Combine's formal channel to the office of the superintendent of the Corvain drum. The audio was the boy finding the crack in the east vault by ear 60 feet below it in 4 seconds, against her laser survey's red flag confirming him. The cover line said, "Before you spend 40 million credits blinding this yard, see attached. The canyon is not the obstacle. It is the only sensor you will ever own that touches every object in the yard at once." Proposal follows. Superintendent Aldous Corm read it. She knew he read it because the rejection arrived in 19 hours, and it was personally written, which from Corm's office was practically an embrace. Proposal reviewed. Technically ingenious, operationally untestable within decommission timetable. Combined sensor procurement contractually committed. Certification of gallery fill expected per schedule, week 9. Addendum, superintendent's note. I have worked this yard 30 years and never needed a consultant to tell me it talks. It is a yard, it is not a temple. Sign your certification. Engineer. Week 9 stood 11 days out. The foam barges were already contracted upriver, and on the gantry above her head once a minute, patient as a lighthouse, the bird's nest beacon went on, saying the thing she had not yet found the spine to tell its keeper, that the best door he ever had was scheduled to be poured full of silence with her name on the work order. Neem found out anyway, because of course he did. He found out the way he found out everything. By ear, in the yard, where the rumor had finally outrun the paperwork. He came up the 9 flights quietly on the 8th evening before the deadline and stood at the platform rail, and he did not accuse her, which was worse than anything. Foam, he said, the whole gallery. They will pour the throat full, and the drum will say nothing at all forever. His patches were drawn down small. You knew the whole time you knew me. Yes, Margot said, no consultant left in her voice at all. He was quiet a long moment. The settle was beginning below them. 10,000 rails ticking themselves cool, the great gentle roll of it around the canyon throat. And she watched him listen to it the way other species watch a sunset they have been told is among the last. At Celsi, you let the dome say everything it knew, one time before you killed it, Neem said finally. He turned around, and his eyes were dry and absolutely level, and that was the moment Margot understood that the boy had never once been her assistant. She had been his. The drum is the best door on the line, and my clan is out there on this water somewhere, and your Combine is going to shut the door in 9 days. He held out the washer on its cord, held it out to her, his whole post, his whole watch, into her human hand. So we are not going to let it whisper goodbye, Margot. We are going to knock once so loud the whole meridian feels whose door this was. And you are the woman with the machines. The plan they built over the next 5 days was, on its face, modest, legal, and almost insultingly procedural, because Margot Hale had learned one true thing in 22 years of contracts. Nobody can stop you doing something extraordinary if the paperwork says you are doing something boring. The paperwork said, final acoustic characterization, full spectrum pre-fill, a standard close-out survey, her signature's last prerequisite. To certify a deadening, the contractor documents the baseline being destroyed, and for a structure of record like the gallery, regulation entitled her to a full power excitation test, drive the space at its resonant frequencies, make it speak at documented amplitude. One night, yard power diverted, all traffic held, every crew at muster for safety. The Combine's own rulebook would clear the stage, kill the ordinary roar, and hand her the loudest instrument on the meridian with the entire line's blessing. They will be expecting tones, she told Neem, over the schematic spread on the trunk lid. Sign sweeps, pink noise. Nobody on the risk desk reads waveform content. They read amplitude limits, and we will be inside the limits. She tapped the array map, her damper rig, 40 distributed units, built to drink sound out of structures. Run backward, rephase, they were drivers. She had designed them. She could reverse them. The gallery's stone throat would do the amplifying for free. We can put any shape we want into the excitation file, any shape at all. The shape took the boy 3 nights to compose, and Margot recorded the composing the way you record a comet, knowing the orbit will not bring it back. He built it out of everything the line had given him. The hearth call, as the spine of course, 3 slow and 2 quick, but carried now the way the old pilots carried history, in cycles. The river pulse underneath, the grave winter version. The settles rolling ticks scored across 40 driver points so the canyon would seem to be cooling at dusk, all at once, at noon, at full power. The dome's braided echo trick from Celsi. The 2 soft answer beats, his mother tongue's footsteps at the door, threaded through the high registers, because a door knock, he said flatly, must carry its own answer inside it, so that anyone who hears it learns both halves of the language at once. 11 minutes, like Celsius. He was superstitious about exactly one thing in all the world, and it was the number 11. On the trunk lid it had a combine file name, Excitation v. Finchinal. Between the 2 of them it had the name he gave it the 3rd night, looking down the dark canyon, the long knock. The yard knew something was coming. That was unavoidable, and then slowly, deliberately, it became the plan's load-bearing wall. The full spectrum test required crew muster. Muster list circulated, and Margot watched Neem walk the low yard with his day pass on his vest, telling the crews who asked, and they all asked, only this: the drum gets to say everything it knows, one time, before. It went down the line faster than the Celsi recording ever had. Engine crews swapped shifts to be in the yard that night. Dubs sent word up from Celsi that the grain ramp's entire night rotation had filed leave requests for the date, and the depot master had given up and chartered a rail car. The portal watch at Haddon Saddle was coming. Mara could not come, papers in a drawer, but a river barge of debt crew. Welders had developed, that week, an urgent and unanimous need to take on water at the Corvain piers. Superintendent Corm signed the test authorization, with the long-suffering air of a man approving a retirement party held on company time, and added one line in his own hand. Amplitude limits per attachment. One night, engineer. Then you sign. 6 days out, Vetch moved, and he moved like what he had always been under the cardstock and the courtesies. A man who stripped dead things for a living, and had decided Drum was nearly dead enough. He did not come for Neem. He had learned the price of that. He came instead for the duck girl called Tick, and the worst of it, the part Margot never stopped carrying, was that they only learned of it because Neem's door stood open to every small soul on the line. Tick arrived at the gantry stairs at 4 in the morning, riding the rods of a northbound coal cut, frost in the fur of her hood, a Murrin child no bigger than Neem, with quick clawed hands and the flat affect of a creature that had been priced young and knew the figure. The Pinch crews wintered at the cross. Vetch held her crew papers, hers and 6 others, and yesterday his foreman had let it be known the papers were being sold south to the deepwater vault gangs, the wet work, the work small Murrin did not come back from. And the same foreman, in the same breath, looking straight at Tick, had observed how a thing like that could still be called off if a certain person were to do a certain simple errand. Carry one message to her old friend the drum boy. That was all. Deliver it and the papers stayed north. She delivered it standing on the gantry in the frost, word perfect in Vetch's own soft exact diction, while Neem went stiller and stiller and Margot's blood went down a long cold stairway. The night of the famous test, every warden and crew in the yard stands at muster, every eye on the gallery, and the piers stand empty. A sensible boy would see that the evening's arrangements have been made by better heads than his. The boy comes to the coal pier at the second muster horn, alone, and signs a crew paper of his own free will, before witnesses, all proper. In exchange, 7 Murrin papers tear up. If the pier stands empty at the second horn, 7 papers go south on the morning tide, and the man regrets that the boy's one knock will have cost so much more than it bought. There it was, the whole man, in one document. He had watched them build a cathedral of a night, and had quietly priced its shadow. The muster that cleared the stage cleared the piers. The law that gathered every witness in one place unwatched every other place. Her beautiful boring paperwork had been read by the one other person on the line who understood that boring paperwork is a weapon, and he had turned it over in his tidy fingers and found its other edge. Free will, before witnesses, all proper. A crew paper signed by an unregistered juvenile of pending status was paper a magistrate might void in a season or 2. If anyone withstanding pursued it, if the barge could be found, and Vetch's barges were very good at not being found. He did not need it to hold forever. He needed it to hold until the boy with the keeper's ears was a line item in a ledger no one audited. You will not go, Margot said, and heard, even as it left her, that it was the single least useful sentence ever spoken on that gantry. Neem stood with Tick's message in him like a coupling pin through the chest. 7 papers. He knew the 7. He had wintered in ducks with 3 of them. And Margot watched the arithmetic he had been raised on. Pay for everything. Owe nothing. Keep the door. Grind against itself. Because every column of it summed the same way. His ears were worth 7 of his friends. The market had said so. And the keeper of a door does not stand behind it while 7 small ones are carried past in the dark. Margot, he said at last, very quietly, in the flat tone she had learned was his load-bearing voice. What do your machines cost, the real worth? All of them, the array, the rig, everything in the trunk. More than Vetch clears in 3 years, she said. Why? He didn't answer that night. He answered it 2 days later by being gone. He did it cleanly, which was the cruelty of it. He did it like a keeper, leaving the watch in order. The beacon on the gantry rail was rewound and freshly twined, good for a 10-day. The survey files were sorted, his chalk marks on the gallery vault catalogued in a child's careful column hand. The canteen tokens he was owed sat stacked on the trunk lid in payment order, squared at the corner the way Vetch squared his card. She saw the mockery and knew it was meant, and beside the tokens, pressed to a strip of waxed wrapper, fingertip dented, 3 slow, 2 quick, and then beneath them, where the 2 soft answering footsteps belonged, one single dent. A call with half its answer torn away, door closing. The second muster horn was 2 nights out. Tick was gone from the duck kid's winter hole at the river stairs. And at the bottom of the trunk, her field recorder was missing. The battered one, the one with all 9 junctions and the dome and the gallery on it, the one he called the box with my whole watch inside. And the trunk's manifest sheet had 1 line added in column hand, the most Neem sentence ever committed to paper, taken on account, 1 recorder, against what my ears will cost you in machines. The long knock is finished and in the file. Play it anyway. A door should not close just because the keeper is taken. Margot Hale stood on her gantry in the iron morning, with the manifest in one hand and the dented wrapper in the other. And the thing that rose in her then was nothing so warm as anger. It was the thing 22 years of contracts had built her for, and never once let her use total structural load-rated calculation. He had left her the plan's whole skeleton, the boy, in his terrible bookkeeping, play it anyway, and he had made only 1 error in all his accounting, the same error everyone on the line kept making about Margot Hale, the error Vetch's tidy ledgers had in their bones. They all kept pricing her as the woman with the machines. Nobody had yet priced the machines run by a woman with nothing left to certify. She went down the 9 flights with her boots ringing the crusher stairs like struck posts, and she went to find Tessa Dubbs. What there was of a council of war convened that noon in the Chelsea crew's chartered railcar on a quiet siding. Margot Dubbs, who had arrived a day early with 11 graders and a look that made the wardens find work elsewhere. The Haddon saddle portal foreman. The duty medic, who came when asked and asked nothing, and fetched up from the river piers by paths Margot did not inquire into. A burn-scared Drithy welder 3rd class whose barge had developed its urgent need of water a day ahead of schedule. Mara, papers in a drawer, 14 years left, sitting in a chartered railcar in company time, doing river folk work, carrying word. Margot laid it all out flat, Vetch's message, the muster shadow, the coal pier, the second horn, the signed paper that needed only to hold until a barge went unfound. Then she laid out what she wanted, and watched the railcar go very quiet. The test runs as authorized, she said. Every limit honored, every crew at muster, Corm gets his boring night. But the excitation file the gallery plays is the boys. All 11 minutes. And here is what none of you yet know about those 11 minutes, because I only finished the analysis at dawn. She spread the waveform map across the slate table, the long knock in full anatomy, and tapped the high registers. The threaded pairs of soft beats Neem had laced through every cycle. He composed the answer into the call. 2 soft beats, the doorwatch's reply, seeded all through it, and a struck reply at close range on iron, prints on a spectrogram like a flare at night. The gallery will drive the whole yard structure. Every rail, every pier, every hull tied up at every mooring in this canyon will carry his call, his actual hand. The spacing no practice block on this line can fake. And my survey array, 40 units, every one of them a calibrated ear, sighted tonight where I tell them, will be listening to the whole yard at once, while it happens. Dubbs got there first, being Dubbs. She stood up slowly with her knuckles on the table, and the grin coming up under her grain creases like weather. You're not running a test, engineer. You're knocking on every door in the drum at the same time and waiting to hear which one knocks back. He'll be below, on the water, in a hull somewhere dark, Margot said. Vetch thinks muster empties the piers and the noise is a funeral. He has never once understood what he's been listening to. The boy has spent 2 years teaching this entire line his hand, and the man is going to hold him inside the one instrument in the world built to find it on the one night it plays. She looked around the rail car, face by face. I can't search the piers. I'd need 50 bodies and I'd tip him at the first lamp. But if Neem hears the drum say his own call, and he will hear it, sealed hull or no, he'll hear it through the waterline with his patches against a rib. If that's what he has, he will answer it. It's his post. It's his language. It is the one thing in this world that boy cannot not answer. And when he strikes, my array hears the strike, and I will put a triangulated fix on that hull inside 4 seconds. What I need from this table is what happens in second 5. The portal foreman cracked his knuckles. The medic was already writing supply lists. And Mara of the cousin water, burn-scared, papers into a drawer, leaned over the waveform of the long knock and read it the way only river eyes at that table could, and touched the threaded answer beats with one finger and said, soft and fierce, the oldest sentence of the drum decks, strike, keeper. The watch is listening. The 2 days between the railcar and the test were the longest engineering deadline of Margot Hale's career, and she had once recertified a habitat dome with the colonists still breathing inside it. The 15 listening ears went out by night, in survey crates, on the shoulders of people whose names appeared on no work order. Dubs's graders carried 4 of them down the coal pier inside a calibration run that Margot logged, truthfully as waterline reference placement, and if the placements happened to bracket every mooring on the South Water, that was geometry's business. The portal foreman took the iron knees of the coal wharf. 2 of Mara's welders, on a water stop with time on their hands, asked so casually whether the engineer needed any brackets run down by the bollards that Margot had to walk away from the trunk to keep her face in. Order. She sighted every ear twice, once on the array map, once standing over it in the dark with her boots on the iron, asking herself the question she had learned at knee height from a small consultant all winter. Not can it hear, but what will it hear first? The hardest hour was Corm's. The superintendent summoned her the evening before the test, alone, to the tower office, where the amplitude attachment lay on his desk next to an incident file she recognized. The Haddon saddle bore, trespass and mischief, 2 cutters dismissed, and a 3rd document she did not, a port advisory 11 days old, flagging a salvage lighter's repeated short movements between the Cross and the Corvain moorings with no manifested cargo. Aldous Corm did not gesture at any of it. He stood at his window with his hands behind his back, looking down at the dark piers, and said, anything irregular about tomorrow night I should know of, engineer? And Margot Hale, with the whole architecture balanced on her tongue, the boy, the trade, the second horn, the trap built into a characterization test, looked at the back of a man bound by 30 years of procedure, who would be obligated, the moment she spoke, to flood the piers with wardens and spring Vetch's arrangement shut with a child still inside it, and made the coldest call of the whole cold season. The test will be louder than anyone expects, Superintendent, she said. And I'd take it kindly if your wardens kept their boots still and their ears open, all of them, the whole night. Corm was silent a moment. Below, small and patient under the pier lamps, the river ran dark toward the sea. Boots still, ears open, he repeated, dry as filing dust, in the tone of a man entering a line item. It happens that is also how I was intending to spend my evening. He turned from the window, and whatever had moved behind his face had finished moving and filed itself. Within limits, engineer. Bring me my boring night. She went down the tower stairs, not at all sure what had just been agreed, and certain only that the 3rd document on the desk had not been on it by accident, that she had been shown a hand, or shown that a hand existed. That one listens, the boy had said. He has just been told for 30 years that it is not allowed. The last thing she did before the horn, she did alone. She climbed to the gantry in the dead afternoon, wound the bird's nest beacon, and let it say its 5 soft notes over the stilled yard once, twice, 3 times, kin here, door open, and then she stilled the pendulum with one finger, precise as punctuation, the way its keeper stopped a ringing pipe and tied it off. Not silenced, held. He comes back and winds you himself, she told the ugly, patient, irreplaceable thing, out loud, alone, 46 years old and bargaining with twine and copper. That's the whole shape of tonight. That's the entire job. The night of the test, the Corvain drum did something it had not done in 80 years of continuous operation. It stopped. Traffic held at the canyon approaches from the evening shift change. The cranes parked their booms and powered down, one by one, each dying hum a small subtraction Margot felt in her teeth. River piers stood lit and empty. At the muster grounds on the high apron, under the floodlights, better than 900 souls assembled in the cold. Yard crews and wardens, the Celsi rotation, the Haddon saddle watch, a delegation of deck crew welders standing in their company graze with their scarred hands quiet. Superintendent Aldous Corm, in his 30-year coat at the front, with the amplitude attachment on a slate in his hand, and at 9 minutes to the first horn, the last switching engine shut down and the silence came. No one who stood on the apron that night ever described the silence the same way twice. The drum had never once been quiet, not in any living memory, not for the oldest crane rigger present, and what settled over the canyon when the iron finally stopped was not absence but attention, a stone throat 80 years full of voices, holding its breath. Margot, alone at her control position on the gantry with the array map glowing across 3 screens, heard her own pulse and the river under everything, slow and grave, and nothing else in the world. 40 driver units waited along the gallery and the canyon walls, rephased, load-tested, cited over 5 nights of quiet work by graders and portal watch volunteers who had carried survey equipment to placements. Margot chose the way up. Jeweler chooses facets. 15 of the 40 were not drivers at all. Those 15 were sighted low, pier pilings, mooring bollards, the iron knees of the coal wharf, the waterline, and they were ears. Somewhere below, in the dark that the muster had emptied, in one of the 11 hulls her nightglass had counted along the coal pier and the salvage moorings, the keeper of the door of Clan Ammit was being held to learn the price of his ears by a man who believed that tonight, of all nights, every ear in the yard pointed away from him. The first muster horn went up the canyon, long and bronze. Corm raised the slate. On Margot's center screen, the authorization line went green. Final characterization, engineer, the superintendent's voice said in her ear, dry as filing dust across the command channel. The yard is yours. One night, make your recording. Acknowledged superintendent, said Margot Hale, and reached past the sign sweep file the risk desk had approved and loaded the long knock and put her finger on the key and said, off channel to the dark below the piers, to a small furnace of a boy with his patches pressed to a cold iron rib somewhere. The way you say it through a door you cannot open from your side. You hold your watch, Neem, we're coming, listen. She struck the key. 3 slow, 2 quick. The gallery took the call from 40 throats at once and did what 80 years of cruise had always known it could do and no instrument had ever asked of it. The drum spoke. The first cycle went up the canyon like a tide going the wrong way, stone deep, hull deep, and the muster grounds 900 strong made a single sound, an exhalation, and then went silent in a way that no horn could have ordered. Because the rails under the apron were saying it, and the floodlight masts were saying it, and the chain link of the muster fence was buzzing it like a struck reed. Kin here, door open. Then the river pulse came in underneath, the boys' grave winter tempo, 40 drivers breathing together, and over it the settle, the evening tick of 10,000 cooling rails scored across the canyon at full power, dusk made audible at the scale of weather, and Margot watched 900 faces on her muster feed tip upward into the sound, watched crane riggers and wardens and welders stand in the canyon they had worked all their lives while the canyon said everything it knew, and she kept her eyes on that feed for as long as she could bear, because the alternative was her left screen, the 15 ears along the waterline, where nothing was happening at all. 2 minutes, the braided echoes came in, call, answering call, answering call, Celsie's trick at 40 times the scale. Nothing on the left screen but river noise, and the great knock rolling through the pilings. He can hear it, she told herself. Fingers still on the keys, he could hear a dry bearing in a moving wagon. He can hear this. The fish in the river can hear this, which had never been the question. The question was the one she had not said aloud in the rail car, the one Mara had answered with her eyes only. Whether a boy who had struck his call at 42 junctions and heard nothing back, who had been baited once already with his own mother tongue and nearly hooked, who had signed himself away on a coal pier precisely so that the people he loved would stop being made to pay for him, whether that boy, hearing the whole world suddenly say his own words back to him, would believe it. Or whether he would press his patches flat and grip his washer and refuse the door one time, the one time it mattered, certain it was the cruelest counterfeit yet. At 2 minutes 50, the left screen grew a problem, and the problem was a smear. Ears 9 through 12, the coal pier set, the heart of her waterline net, began silting over with broadband wash, a fat ugly band of it, grinding across exactly the frequencies where a small hand striking iron would live. Margot's stomach dropped through the gantry grating before her training caught it. Mechanical, rotary, close to the water. Pumps. Somewhere down the south mooring, somebody had started bilge pumps, big ones, throats wide open. And there was nothing to pump. The river was low and quiet, which meant the pumps were not pumping anything. They were singing on purpose. Vetch had stood under the long knock for 3 minutes, the man who had recognized the beacon for what it was on a gantry rail months ago, the one other person on the line who understood what paperwork and patience could do. And he had read the night, every layer of it, and answered her composition with one of his own. He could not stop the drum from calling, so he was burying the reply. She had 4 seconds of pure cold animal panic, and then she had the boy's voice in her head, flat, pedantic, from 100 trunk-lit evenings. You do not listen for a sound, Margot. You listen for the hole it makes. And she had her hands on the phase board, because the long knock was 40 drivers under her 10 fingers, and a score is not a cage. She rewrote it live. She pulled the river pulse down out of the low end, let the canyon coast on its own stored thunder, and rephased the southern drivers a half cycle. Against the northern, and into the towering architecture of the boy's composition, she cut what no risk desk had approved and no excitation profile had ever contained, rests. 2 seconds of engineered total structural silence carved clean out of the heart of each cycle. The whole drum gathered up midward and held, and in each rest 15 ears with their gains stood on end, listened to nothing but the river, the pumps, and whatever the pumps were trying to drown. The first rest fell across the canyon like a held breath. On the muster feed 900 faces lifted as one, waiting. She heard, even through the feed, the silence land on them, the great voice stopping mid-call, and it did not read as malfunction, it read as listening, because that is what it was, and 900 freight workers stood in it with their boots still, and their ears open like a single instrument. Aldous Corm's voice came onto the command channel once, 2 words, dry as dust and pitched, she realized deliberately low, the voice of a man minding the quiet, steady on, rest 2, pumps, river, nothing, the washground on. Somewhere in the dark, a soft exact man was winning. Rest 3 at 3 minutes 40. In the deep notch between the pump band's grinding teeth, ear 11 took a knuckle of sound, not the call, not iron. Wood a deck plate, struck twice, soft, hesitant, the spacing almost right, the weight not, small hands not his. Margot froze it on the screen. 4/10 of a second of someone else's child in the dark of the South moorings trying his language. Tick, or one of the 7, or some other priced soul on that hull tapping back at the night for reasons that no inquiry would ever fully unwind, and she marked the bearing, and she said to the screen, silent through her teeth, a vow with coordinates in it, all of you. Tonight the door is opening for all of you. Then she stopped chasing and trusted the score, because the cycle was rolling around again, and what rode in on it was the part of the composition the pumps could not touch. The part written in registers a bilge throat was never made to reach. 4 minutes the high registers arrived. 2 soft beats, threaded, seated, footsteps coming to a door, woven through the towering call the way he had woven them on the trunk lid with his face like a closed gate, the answer carried inside the knock, both halves of the language, so that anyone who hears it learns the reply. On the left screen, ear 9, coal pier, third to bollard, 40 meters from the end mooring, drew a flare. Small, sharp iron-borne, close range, struck not at the hull but through it, the weight of a hand that strikes the way barge folk strike. 3 slow, 2 quick, and then Margot's vision went hot at the edges. 2 soft. Call and answer both, complete correct. The door watch's full reply, the whole protocol, struck out of the dark of a sealed hull by the keeper on his post. I hear you. Door open. I am here. Fix, she said aloud, alone to 3 screens, and her hands were already moving. Ears 9, 11, 14, cross bearings resolving, the triangulation cone narrowing on the array map like water going down a drain, end mooring, coal pier, the salvage lighter riding low and dark beyond the last lamp. A hull her night glass had counted and priced at nothing, because it was registered, manifested, and boring. Orrin Vetch's paperwork, of course. Inside 4 seconds, she had it boxed to a single waterline, and on the command channel, calm as a shipping notice, Margot Hale said the sentence 5 people in a chartered rail car had spent 2 days preparing for. All stations, characterization anomaly, coal pier end mooring, salvage lighter. Structural response inconsistent with manifest. Requesting immediate verification of that hull's cargo, superintendent, under your authority with witnesses. For the rest of her life, she would maintain, deadpan in every retelling, that this was a true and accurate acoustic finding. The lighter's structural response was inconsistent with its manifest. Its manifest said scrap. Its response said boy. What moved next moved the way a freight yard moves when it has been waiting 900 strong for a horn. All at once, on rails laid in advance. The muster dissolved at its downhill edge as the Celsi graders and the portal watch went over the apron rail in a body, Dubs in front with a lamp in each fist. The deck crew welders were nearer and faster and did not wait for anyone's authority. Riverfolk had heard the answer strike in their own bones, and Mara's people took the pier stairs like a tide. Floodlights swung. The command channel filled with Corm's voice, clipped and furious, and Margot would replay it later to be sure, furious in the right direction, ordering wardens to the coal pier, ordering the lighter held at its mooring, ordering in his dry 30-year diction, that nothing and no one leaves that hull but through my inspection, and overhead, immense, patient, unstoppable, the long knock rolled on into its 7th minute, because Margot Hale kept her finger nowhere near the stop key. Let it play. Let the whole meridian feel it. A door should not close just because the keeper is taken, and tonight, by every god of iron and water, this one was not going to. It was Tick who opened the hull. This part came out afterward, in pieces, in the medic's annex and the inquiry record. How the lighter's foredeck hatch unsealed from inside while Vetch's 2 remaining cutters were still arguing over whether soft-spoken standing orders covered any of what was rolling down the canyon at them. How a small Murrin shape with quick clawed hands, carried aboard as the errand's collateral, a paper held against a paper, had spent the long knock's first 6 minutes working the hatch dogs in the dark, because the drum was saying kin here, door open in a voice that filled the river, and somewhere below her in the scrap hold a flat small voice she knew was answering it through the iron, and Tick, Priced Young, who knew the figure, had run her own arithmetic on the evening and concluded that every door in the world was open tonight except the one she was sitting on. Defection is also a knock. Hers was a hatch swinging back against a deck plate, one clean iron clang into the canyon's roar, and Ear 9 caught that too. The welders reached the mooring first. What the inquiry record states is that the lighter's lines were cast off by persons unknown attempting departure, and that the vessel was prevented from leaving the mooring by approximately 40 deck crew welders, who boarded without orders and without hesitation and held her against the pier in the inquiry's memorable phrase, by hand. What Margot saw from the gantry, in floodlight, 11 minutes into the long knock, was the dark hull at the end of the coal pier crusted suddenly bright with people. Gray company coveralls and grain-creased canvas and warden blue, lamps everywhere, the river blazing. And then a roar going up from the pier that cut through 80 years of stone song, and the medic's voice on the channel steady doing her job. I have him. I have him. He's cold, he's furious, and he's asking. A break in the steadiness, the sound of a woman relaying a message with her throat tight. Engineer, he's asking, did you get the strike on the recording? He wants it logged that he answered inside one cycle. Margot Hale put her head down on her control board, on her folded arms on 40 years, and let the last cycle of the long knock roll over her, and into an open channel to 900 witnesses, she said, locked. The keeper answered inside one cycle, time-stamped and archived. And then, because the door of her was off its hinges entirely, letter perfect, Neem, letter perfect. They brought him up the pier stairs wrapped in a grader's coat, riding on Dubbs's shoulder with his washer in his fist, and the crews lining the route did not cheer like a crowd. They did something Margot never forgot. As he passed, hand after calloused hand reached out to the nearest iron, rail, bollard, fence pipe, crane leg, and struck it, 3 slow, 2 quick, ragged, overlapping, hundreds deep down the canyon, until the boy on the foreman's shoulder, half frozen and entirely composed, lifted the washer and answered the whole Corvain drum at once. 2 beats soft. The drum, the canyon, the night, took the 2 soft beats of a small tired hand and carried them clear to the stone rim and the river both. Door open. Keep her home. Orrin Vetch was taken at the inland gate 40 minutes later, on foot alone, by 2 wardens and a gate clerk. An immense and incurious Holland, who had seen every species of paperwork crime and who confirmed his identity, the record notes, without being asked. The charge that held was the one Margot had called up the canyon, cargo inconsistent with manifest. Then the lighter's hold gave the inquiry its slow plain feast, 7 Murrin crew papers in a strongbox awaiting the southern tide. Ledgers. Beautiful tidy ledgers, pricing the ears and hands and lungs of 40 years of small ones in soft exact figures, and a signed crew paper, 1 day old, in a careful column hand, which the magistrate's office voided before the week was out on grounds that wanted no season at all. Signature obtained from an unregistered juvenile, under duress, against hostage papers. The strip rights concession went into receivership. The pinch crews went into the medic's annex, and then because Dubbs and the crew chiefs of the Meridian had spent that same week conducting arithmetic of their own, they went into apprenticeships. 7 small ones salted through 7 freight crews whose forewomen had stood on the apron the night the drum spoke and had no further questions about what good ears were worth, or to whom. Tick went to the Celsi graders. Dubbs put it in writing at the annex door, in front of witnesses, with grain dust in every seam of her. 1 Murrin juvenile, apprentice, grain systems, papers held by no one. The girl read the line twice, looked up with her priced young eyes and asked what it cost. It cost you turning up, said Tessa Dubbs, same as it cost everybody. And that was the 3rd door the long knock open that was never on any schematic of Margot's. 11 days later, on the morning the foam barges had been due, Superintendent Aldous Corm stood in the crusher gallery with the certification open on his slate, unsigned, and the silence of a stopped yard around him for the 2nd time in 80 years. He had ordered the hold himself. Traffic at the approaches, an unheard-of hour of stillness, and would say only that a superintendent verifies findings personally. And he had Margot strike a single test tone, and he listened to the gallery answer, all the way down its long stone throat to the river. 30 years, he said at last. I told consultants this yard talks, and not one of them measured anything but how to make it stop. He keyed the slate. The foam fill certification went gray. In the file behind it, queued by his own office 2 days prior, the alternative compliance pathway came up flagged for trial implementation, resonant positioning, Phase 1 contractor of record, M. Hale. The Combine's procurement people tell me your scheme saves them 31 million credits, engineer, which is the only language carrying any weight upriver. So that is the reason in the record. Put your 40 ears wherever you want them. He looked down the gallery, dry as filing dust. The other reason can stay in the stone where this yard keeps everything that matters. The resident contract was drawn that same week. Phase 1 alone was 3 years of work. And Margot Hale, who had not slept in the same bed 60 nights running in 2 decades, read the housing clause 4 times to be sure it said what it said. A yard cottage on the rim road, coal allowance, river view. She signed it with the same stylus she struck posts with, and when she looked up, the gate clerk had already stamped the second document waiting in the tray, which Margot had not submitted, because the medic had, with Quorum's office seconding and the rail union's Meridian Lodge standing sponsor. Registry of 1 Drithy juvenile resident, Corvain Drum, occupation. And here the form's drop fields had failed everyone, so the clerk had simply written it in by hand the way the yard had already settled. It bellkeeper, guardian of record Hale, pending clan claim, pending clan claim. Margot had insisted on those 3 words herself, against the advice of the union's paperman, who pointed out that open-ended clauses invite open-ended grief. She had a child's column hand bookkeeping in her trunk and a dented strip of wax wrapper in her breast pocket, and she knew exactly what she was guardian of, a keeper in his post and his watch, which had never for 1 hour been about her. The claim stays open, she told the paperman. That clause is the whole point of him. Write it in. They rebuilt the drum's nervous system through the spring, and the work was the happiest engineering of her life. 40 ears became 90. The canyon's voice, mapped now in a chalk and laser survey that one small consultant had conducted at knee height all winter, became the yard's positioning grid. Every car, every crane load, every hull at the moorings touched and placed by the stone's own returning song, dustproof, fogproof, free. The automation suite that was meant to need a silenced canyon learned instead to listen to a loud one, and the consultants who came after, and they came from 4 lines and 2 continents, because 31 million credits is a bell that carries, were walked down the gallery by Superintendent Quorum and shown the trial data and told, in 30-year diction, that the future of freight handling was apparently a yard that hears itself, a sentence he managed to deliver every single time as though it were a budget item and not a hymn. And at shift end, every evening, the new system spoke. That had been the boy's price, stated flatly at the first design review he attended sitting on a crate stenciled drivers. Spare, and entered into the minutes by a combine secretary who had no idea she was ratifying a treaty. The all clear, the signal that the day's count was good and the yard stood safe, would not be a horn or a chime out of a catalog. It would be the call. 3 slow, 2 quick, struck by the gallery itself down every rail in the Corvain drum, and answered. This was the clause he would not trade. By hand, 2 soft beats on the nearest iron, by whoever stood the evening watch. The crews ratified it the way crews ratify things, by doing it before the paperwork cleared. Within a season, it had gone down the line with the freight, the way everything he made went down the line. Yardmasters at Chelsea and the Cross and Tarwick Port, Tarwick, where a barge had once been taken for an owing, closing their days with the hearth call of Clan Omet, most of them never knowing whose door they were keeping open, knowing only that it was the drum's way, and the drum's way had a sound to it that made a yard feel like somewhere a person could be small and still be safe. Margot knew. Every manifest that left the Corvain drum that Spring carried, in its routing header, a 40-second acoustic certification sample, a regulation she had drafted herself, dry-titled, dull as ditch water, waved through procurement without a second glance. Resonant signature, reference recording, Corvain drum, evening settle. 11 minutes condensed to 40 seconds. The long knock riding the freight to every port on the Meridian and every line the Meridian touched, in the pocket of every cargo that moved. 42 junctions had taken him 2 years on foot. The answer marks started coming back in the 5th week. The first was chalk, low on a tank car out of the western branch, photographed by a Chelsea grader who had learned what to look for from a boy on a dome floor, the half circle with the line turned over. Door found. No name, no note, no claim. Rig folk move, and rig folk in debt crews move carefully. But Neem stood looking at the photograph on Margot's slate for a long time, his patches going wide and narrow, like something breathing after a long dive. And then he went up to the gantry and rewound the beacon, though it didn't need it. The second and third came together, scratched in weld slag on a flat car's stake pocket. Door found, and beside it a second mark Mara had to translate when her span crew cycled through. In midsummer, a curl with 2 dots, clan script old. It says water, remember, she said, and would not say more in front of the boy. And later, on the pier, with her scarred patches flat, told Margot alone, it's what you put on a grave float, and on a wedding barge. It means a thing was scattered and is not lost. They're saying it to him. Her knuckles struck the bollard, too soft. 1,400 miles of company drawers, engineer, and they're saying it back up the line to a child on a rock. You built a yard that hears itself. His people are using it to hear each other. The claim came in autumn, and it came the way he had always said it would. The way Margot had written 3 open words into a registry against, on the water, a grain barge out of the southern delta, riding low, in on the morning tide, and from the river stairs, where he now drew a stipend as acoustic inspector, juvenile grade, Corm's office had invented the rank with a straight face. Neem heard it before the pilot's horn, before the mooring call, before anyone. He went still in the middle of the stairs with his head turned and his whole small frame tuned like a stay wire, because the barge was knocking. Hull strikes, deliberate, carrying across the water the way barge folk strikes carry, through the wood, through the river, through the bones of the feet. 3 slow, 2 quick, and then again, closer, patient, certain. The call struck toward the drum, toward the door, by someone who had ridden it upriver to its source. The yard, which heard itself now in 90 places, heard the boy answer before Margot even reached the stairs. 2 beats, struck on the iron rail of the river stairs with a worn steel washer, so hard and so clean that Ear 9 logged them as a calibration event. Her name was Ven. She came up the pier alone, ahead of the deck crew, a dreathy woman gone gray-gold at the temple patches, broad-handed, salt-cracked, with 14 years of debt worked down to 2 and a 4-woman's tab on her company grays, and she walked to within 8 feet of the boy and stopped, treaty distance, and Margot, standing back with her heart in her teeth, watched 2 keepers price each other on an open pier. Then the woman crouched down on her heels, slow, deliberate, to a small one's eye level, the way you crouch at a door you were asking to enter, and she spoke in Rig tongue, and the inquiry-trained part of Margot's mind recorded that the first word out of her cracked wide open in the middle. She was not his mother. Margot had braced 9 months for a mother, and the line's flat mercy was plainer and stranger. Aunt of the watch. Ven of Amit's line, his mother's elder cousin, the creche barge deck mistress, who had stood the door watch of Amit's promise herself as a girl, who had taught the hearth call's spacing to a row of small ones with a washer on a cord, one of whom had ears like nothing she'd met in 40 years on the water, scattered to a Delta dredge crew the day the clan broke. She had heard the drum certification sample played off a manifest reader in a dredge office 1,100 miles south, heard 40 seconds of freight yard regulation, and stood up off her bench with her whole watch looking at her because she knew the hand. Spacing is a signature, she said. I taught that signature its first stroke. Then she had worked, traded, and called in 14 years of river favor to put herself on a grain barge, going north, and at every junction the barge slowed through. Every one she had seen the marks coming back. Door found, like lamps being lit up a long, dark hall. What broke up the pier's composure entirely was the ledger. Neem heard her out, still as a post, and then went up the gantry stairs at a dead run and came back down with the battered field recorder, recovered from a salvage lighter's evidence locker, and never since out of his reach, and stood in front of her and played, without a word, the junctions. All of them. Calder Reach, the ferry slip, the tin roof over Black Water. Chelsea before its silencing, 42 strikes of the watch, 2 years of doorkeeping, the whole post, log, timestamp paid in full, the proof, rendered in the only currency his people had ever banked, that the door of Clan Emmett had never once closed. Ven of Amit's line listened to the whole accounting on her knees on a freight pier with her. Patches spread wide as coins and her broad hands flat on her thighs, and when it ended she said the thing that Margot Hale, guardian of record, pending clan claim, had been waiting 9 months to stand still for. The clan is gathering, keeper. 3 crews bought clear already, the rest working down their papers. There is talk of a hull by spring after next, small ones your age, your cousins, on the southern water. Her voice was level the way his went level, load-bearing. I have standing to claim you to the Delta tonight. The watch is yours by right, and the choice is yours by the same right. So the watch asks you straight, where does the keeper keep the door? The pier went very quiet. Margot did not move and did not breathe and did not. This cost more than the concert hall and the foam fill in 2 years of contracts together, say one single word. Neem looked down the canyon. The morning cut was rolling in up top, 90 ears placing every axle of it. The gallery would speak at shift end and the whole yard would answer by hand. The beacon ticked on the gantry rail, wound that morning, good for a 10-day, and the river ran south 1,400 miles, through every junction where a lamp was being lit. He took the washer off his neck cord, and for a moment Margot thought he meant to hand it back up the line of inheritance. Post-discharged, watch ended. He struck the pier rail instead. 3 slow, 2 quick. And then he answered it himself, 2 soft, both halves of the language in one small hand, and looked up at his aunt with his eyes dry and absolutely level. The door stays where the whole river can hear it, he said. I keep this one. You gather them. And when the new hull takes the water, for the first and only time that morning his flat voice bent, bright and fierce, a keeper's voice and a child's at once. It comes north, and it ties up at my pier, and I will teach every small one on it the spacing myself." Ven looked at him a long moment. Then she looked past him, up at the human woman standing back with her boots planted on iron she had refused to let go silent, and the deck mistress of Amit's promise inclined her gray-gold head to Margot Hale the width of one rivet, which Mara said afterward was a bow they did not give twice in a lifetime, and said in trade pidgin, so the guardian of record would carry the exact words. "Then the clan owes this door, we pay our owings. He stays, we rout through. The drum is written a hearth of Amit from this tide." She rose, knees cracking, deck mistress to her bones, and delivered the last line as plain freight yard fact, which is the only way the great sentences ever arrived in that canyon. "It is good, woman of the drum. Every clan on this river lost its hearths to ledgers. Took a human and a rock that talks to teach the water you can knock a hearth back into the world." She sailed on the evening tide, with the recorder's archive copied to her slate, and a 40-second sample in every routing header south. The marks kept coming back all winter. The hull was laid the spring after next. The yard apprentices, tick foremost, fought viciously for the honor of riveting. And if you stood on the rim road on the night it first tied up at the Corvain piers, you could hear a drum deck going till dawn inside a stone throat that gathered every stroke of it and gave it to the sky, and underneath, hour after hour, a small gray-gold figure with a washer on a cord walking the rail of his own barge at last, teaching a row of small ones the spacing, strict as a watchmaker, 3 slow, 2 quick. Again your weight through the wood. Again, but that came later and was its own story and belonged to the clan. What belonged to Margot Hale was quieter, and she kept it the way the yard kept things, in the stone. It was the ordinary evenings of that first year, the contract year, the rebuilding year. When the work was done and the cottage windows went amber, on the rim road, and at shift end the gallery spoke down every rail in the Corvain drum, 3 slow, 2 quick, the day's count good, the yard standing safe. And all down the canyon, from crane cabs and switch shacks and pier stairs, hand after hand answered on the nearest iron, 2 soft beats, footsteps coming to a door, and on the high gantry a boy who had walked 1,400 miles knocking on the world stood his watch. Beside a woman who had spent 22 years silencing it, the two of them leaning on the rail in the cooling air, listening to the great instrument they had refused to let die count its children before sleep. "Letter perfect," Neem would say every evening when the last answer faded off the rim. "Keeper's sign-off, watch complete." "Letter perfect," Margot would answer, and the drum carried it, the way it carried everything worth keeping, all the way down to the river and out into the dark, where the doors were opening one by one along 1,400 miles of iron, and would go on opening, because somewhere a child had decided that a door should never close, just because the world got loud. And a whole freight, lying hand by calloused hand, had decided to believe him.